The statistic that jarred me the most, and this fact I heard that kind of kept me up at night, was the reality that the biggest killer of people my age and up until I'm 42 is suicide. The biggest killer of young people in Australia is suicide. And I remember hearing this as a teenager living with my big Indian family in Albury-Wodonga. And in fact, if you lived in a rural town, you were 2 times more likely to attempt to take your own life. And unfortunately, that was a reality I was witnessing around me. And that reality didn't go away in the 12 years since I finished high school. And I followed a fairly traditional path from high school to university to working this corporate job, but still this statistic stuck with me. And I thought, if I don't do something about this, then who else will? And how can I rely on others to do it? So in 2017, I quit my corporate job and I wanted to focus on using sustainable models like a social enterprise to change this narrative on suicide, to give connection to young people. So I knew that when I look around at my peers, I wouldn't think suicide could be the biggest killer of their life. And I thought, why is that the case? And as I started to sort of unpick this problem of suicide and even reflected on my own mental health at the time as a teenager, I realized there were many factors that were leading me to make unhealthy life choices. Factors like feeling like no one understood me, like I was isolated. And when you added different intersectionalities, such as I identify as being a queer woman of color, so being LGBTIQA, and the statistics for that is if you are a transgender young person, you are 14 times more likely. If you're an indigenous trans person, you are 20 times more likely. What does that even look like? 20 times more likely to attempt to take your own life. And I realized there were all these factors that made up a person. And it wasn't because they were indigenous or because they were LGBTIQA, but rather the stigma associated around being a queer person, a person of color, an indigenous person. What society thought of you, what stereotypes it put on you, what you thought of yourself, your lack of representation, that's what led to the poor mental health and that feeling of loneliness, which is something I think all Australians experience. You know, the interesting thing about suicide is it doesn't discriminate. Yes, there are certain minorities and intersectionalities that means you are most likely to, but 8 Australians a day die from suicide, and they come from all diverse backgrounds. And while the statistics show that men are recorded to have taken their life, in fact, men and women on equal numbers attempt suicide. And I think it just shows that despite gender, race, ethnicity, social class structure, what language you speak, it's a phenomenon that affects everyone. And if you know someone who's suicided, you are 10 times more likely. So it has the snowball effect, and then it just shakes communities as they mourn the loss of this person.